Good evening. My name's Jonathan Quilter. I'm the Corporate Manager for Strategic Planning at Rochford District Council. And welcome everyone to this webinar on the Rochford Local Plan. I'm going to take you through a presentation this evening and also a demonstration on the consultation portal and the interactive map. And there's also some questions at the end. We have received some questions in advance, which we'll deal with first, and time permitting, we'll pick up on questions as they're raised during the session. Anything that we can't pick up in this session, we're more than happy to pick up post the meeting, and we'll come back to you on those responses. Okay, without further ado, we'll make a start. So the agenda for today, this evening, is set out here. So we'll take you through what is a local plan, what stage is the Rochford Local Plan at, how to take part in the current consultation that's ongoing, and as mentioned, obviously how to use the interactive map and questions. So firstly, what is a local plan? So in simple form, it's a local plan is a council's long-term blueprint for how the district will grow and change. It sets out where new homes, jobs, infrastructure and community facilities should go. It also protects important places such as green spaces, heritage and the environment, provides the framework for making planning decisions, giving clarity for residents, developers and businesses. Every area must have an up-to-date local plan, and the requirement is that they're updated at least every 5 years. There are a number of stages that we have to go through in order to prepare a local plan. This simple infographic just sets out some of those key points. Principally over most of the process, there is clearly a need for evidence gathering at the very beginning, and obviously in the case of preparing each stage. We have a number of positions where you have a requirement for what's called Regulation 18, and that is in essence in reference to national planning legislation. But that means you may have heard of documents such as issues and options or preferred options, and they're often under that banner of Regulation 18. The more final stage, or the pre-submission draft stage, that sets out the final version of the document that's expected to be submitted, and that's called the Regulation 19 stage. And the stage following this is in terms of submission to the Secretary of State of the government, referred to as Regulation 22. And once it has been submitted, there is a need to undertake an examination in public. And so that's once we've formally submitted, we enter that phase, and you have to undertake examination hearings and obviously go through the various steps of that. Following that, then there may well be indication from an inspector, an appointed inspector, that there is a need for modifications to a plan, and that is termed as main modifications. And again, that is subject to public consultation. And then following, provided that we get through that process, or any local plan gets through that process, then there is the final stage, which is adoption, and that rests with the council to make that decision. So overall, that gives you a view of really where what the key steps are in a high level. Obviously, there's a number of things that come in between those. So in terms of national, just wanted to outline here the national requirements versus local choices. Clearly, obviously, we have to work within a system, as just mentioned, and really in terms of to clearly outline that the government obviously has to set those rules, and that is through legislation. So it requires every local authority to prepare and maintain an up-to-date local plan as a starting point. There is national policy and guidance. So you may have heard of the National Planning Policy Framework. That is the principal document which we all have to adhere to. And there is accompanying practice guidance that sits beneath that or alongside that. And that sets out how plans must be prepared and examined. There is also, in terms of housing need figures, the government does set those housing targets through what's called the standard method, and that is what the council is expected to plan for. Overall legal tests and processes also are set to meet those through preparing a local plan. Now, in terms of what that means locally for the council, in this case Rochford District Council, We obviously have to ensure that we're interpreting that national policy and applying it to our local circumstances, gathering local evidence on housing, employment, environment, infrastructure constraints, developing strategies and objectives to guide growth in the district, identifying suitable locations to meet development needs over a minimum 15-year period. So we're very much looking on the long-term horizon, and officers are required to prepare and assess options, and that is ultimately for elected members to make those key decisions in terms of where the plan is at each stage, as mentioned earlier, around the final stage, which is adoption. So moving on to what stage is Rochford's local plan at? So firstly, why does Rochford need a new local plan? The current adopted local development framework is increasingly dated. So there was a series of documents that have been previously adopted, starting back in 2011 up to 2014. And the plan period for those documents run until 2025. Now, that does not mean that that plan is not still in place. That does remain in place until a new plan is prepared and ultimately adopted. But of course, the older that gets, the more or less in conformity potentially it may be within with national policy and guidance. That's very much important that we maintain an up-to-date plan. Now, the current housing supply, the figure there, 1.97 years. And what that means is that the government sets a housing target, an annual figure, and that is used to calculate based on the number of planning permissions that you have. How much of that, what that equates to is how much supply you've got. And the reason that's important is because it's expected that authorities will maintain at least a 5-year land supply for housing. So when that dips below that figure, there are certain triggers that are sort of brought into play. So that does have an effect on decision making in terms of what's called the presumption in favour of sustainable development, and more recently in terms of engaging the position around grey belts, which is a new sort of terminology which is applied to green belts. So that's certainly very important. So based on, and I'll come on to later in the presentation around what those new figures are, because the government did update those in terms of the standard method figure, and that has recently impacted on those on that 5-year land supply figure. It's also important for Rochford that obviously we have that up-to-date plan, so we can decide where growth and protection could happen. Without that position, that's clearly not, there's no view on that without a plan in place. Likewise, with need to coordinate infrastructure and growth, up-to-date policies. So clearly on the day-to-day with planning applications, the local plan sets the policies by which those planning applications are assessed against. So it's very important that we have up-to-date policies. And clearly in the preparation of a local plan for Rochford, it's enabling residents and other key stakeholders to have their say and shape the priorities within that new plan going forwards, as mentioned, over a 15-year period. So where are we currently in terms of the timetable? So we do have to work to a timetable. There's a requirement for government for us to prepare an up-to-date timetable and work towards that and keep that up to date. There are some previous stages we've already had consultations on. So this goes back to 2018. There was an issues and options consultation at that point, and a spatial options consultation in 2021. The current stage where we are at the moment, and obviously the purpose of today, is around the draft local plan regulation 18 consultation, which runs until the 24th of March. That is obviously that's subject to we've been through a process that's been through various meetings and approved, and then obviously the consultation has been undertaken. Following this, there will be a need to prepare, as mentioned, the next stage, which is the Regulation 19. Currently, as per the timetable that we're indicating, that'll be around the September period of this year, with further consultation undertaken as part of that. And then there is a need to submit to government by the end of this year. Now, the reason why that date is set is that the government has indicated for plans such as Rochford's, which is being prepared under what's called the current system, that we would need to submit by the end of this year in order for it to be examined and assessed against the current national policy. What that means is that there is a new plan making system coming into play post December. So if the plan didn't meet that deadline, the risk being that we would have to prepare a new style plan in accordance with that new legislation. So clearly there's a need for that. And we're in a very similar position to a number of our neighbours and other authorities across the country. Post that, in terms of, as mentioned, we'll be in examination phase and working towards hopeful adoption. Clearly that is in the hands of the planning inspectors once that has been submitted at that stage. So in terms of the consultation document that's currently out, so that is effectively split into 4 main sections, which are just sort of indicated here. We've got the first section, which is setting out the vision, the objectives, sort of spatial portrait of the area. So that really is kind of the overarching principles by which we're trying to prepare the plan, and obviously the policies and so forth that come beneath it. So that's very much a draft, as all of this document is draft version of that, and we'll welcome comments on those. The second section is around terms of building a sustainable future. So that really looks around particular policies that are looking at how we manage growth, the sort of community benefits and things that we need to accommodate there, transport in terms of movement and sort of the infrastructure provision, the economy as well. So clearly there's a number of different key areas within that section, sorry. And then the third section is around what's termed as creating quality places. So that deals with town centres, homes, so in terms of affordable housing, for example, housing mix. Then we've got sections on heritage, natural environment, and then finally the final section is exploring growth opportunities. So this is where there are sites that have been identified for further testing, and I'll come on to obviously a bit more detail around that. But as indicated there at this stage, in this version of the local plan, they are not identified as proposed allocations or preferred sites, but very much trying to provide people an opportunity to feed into that process following site assessment that's been undertaken so far. So as I mentioned earlier, the housing requirements, that's something that is set by government. So as I mentioned, it's the standard method that the government sets for every local authority what their housing target is. So there's this national formula, and that estimates how many new homes each council area should plan for. In terms of Rochford, this currently works out at 689 homes a year, and there is also a requirement under policy to apply a 5% buffer. That's for assumed non-delivery of sites as they come forward. And that's again set out in national policy. That, as I mentioned, that figure has increased. So in December 2024, the NPPF, as it was adopted then, they did update the standard method, and that meant that our housing need increased significantly. And that's the same for many of all authorities across the country. So in essence, the need for the district has increased by 90% based on the government's targets. What that means over the plan period, as I mentioned, obviously we do need to prepare a plan for a minimum of 15 years. And that does account for 15 years from adoption. So there's some time added on for that, that we would need to account for almost 14,500 homes if we were to meet that government target. As I said, the formula itself is based on 2 principal things: how much housing stock needs to grow and local affordability pressures. So what does that mean for our local plan? We want to make sure the homes planned for Rochford are the right types of homes for our communities and they're realistically deliverable. And because we are still gathering evidence, and there is still more work to be done to work towards that Regulation 19 stage, and obviously we want to hear your views in this consultation. The current draft local plan does not include a final housing target. So instead, the plan sets out a range of potential development sites, and we can test options and hear what you think about those, which can feed into the decision making going forwards. in terms of the numbers, as obviously what that translates into, it's not just simply all new homes that need to be accounted for. When we look at that total need figure, the starting point is understanding what's called our baseline. So that means we're looking at what's currently got planning permission, what's been completed in the plan period. So we're looking from a period of obviously as set out there, we've got 2023 to 4 and 24-25 figures, as well as any existing allocations in our current local plan that can be effectively that we don't need to plan for those because they are in the baseline. And then what that leaves is that figure in the second sort of grouping of information where like I say, we've identified potential sites for further testing and what that means in practice. You'll see there in terms of the two columns, there is obviously some of that, a significant number of those homes that could be post the end of the plan period. So we have to be, as I mentioned, around deliverability. We do need to be very mindful of the likelihood of being able to deliver homes in a particular time frame, and that's based on general trends and evidence, again, that all local authorities have to consider. So that's very much more applicable to those larger size sites, which if they're going to be delivering, let's say, more than 1,700 homes, that the likelihood is that they would not be delivering more than that within the 15-year plan period. So that's a critical point there that comes from that. There is also an allowance for windfalls, so that means unplanned, but clearly on the basis of this is a local plan process, we want it to be plan led. But there is an acknowledgement there will still be windfall sites coming forward, so that again is taken off that total figure. So as I'll come on to the maps, but what that shows is in terms of that in theory that government target could be met. However, we still need to prepare more evidence to understand what that means in practice for the district and what is potentially able to be accommodated. So clearly that position has not been finalised at all. So we do need to understand the implications going forwards, and there's a lot more work to be done. Just to give you a sort of a visual cue, and we'll come on to the interactive map and we can show you that, but this just gives you a visual cue of around what sites or the areas where they have been identified for further testing. Again, being clear to emphasise they are not identified as allocations at this point in time. But that does show you the sort of the broad areas where the sites are currently shown. And this is very much following a process of assessment. So we have prepared, and as again, I'll outline some of the evidence that sits behind a local plan. As you can imagine, there's a number of documents that comprises. One of the key ones is what's called the site assessment methodology paper. So what that sets out is the approach by which we've taken so far in assessing sites that have been submitted. So since we've begun this particular phase of local plan preparation, as I say, it goes back to 2014 onwards, since the last plan was adopted, that sites have been submitted to the council for consideration. So we've had obviously a number of sites that have been submitted over time, and we have to apply our methodology to that in terms of how they've been assessed so far. But there is, again, still more work to be done when it comes to the other evidence documents that are still being moved forwards and updated, and that will influence the process, notwithstanding also the comments that clearly we will be receiving on those sites, and any other sort of piece of work we need to do going forward. So that's clearly important that we do, again, emphasising we need to get people's comments back on those so we can understand the full picture. So what else does local plan need to deliver? Now, I do appreciate that the housing side does somewhat dominate the discussion, but there clearly is a number of, it's not just about housing. There is also a need to understand what the employment needs are. And again, we've had evidence prepared to understand what that could look like. There's currently an identified need of around just over 9 hectares of new employment land needed by the end of the plan period, a need for 46 hectares of new open space by 2040. There'll be a need, work is ongoing in terms of playing pitch provision, new indoor leisure facilities. There'll be new retail space required, food and beverage space, commercial leisure, cultural space, etc. And there's also specialist housing requirements. So again, these are very much sort of set out as a sort of principle around national policy that we need to address these matters. That includes um, older persons housing, gypsies and travellers, and again, there's evidence that sits behind those to give us that local context and what that means for Rochford. So again, there are decisions that will need to be made around how we address that. So the evidence base, again, that's a terminology that's used to really sort of describe the collection of various documents that sit behind this. So we do appreciate that obviously from a layperson's perspective, there's a lot of information that comes with a local plan. A local plan in itself is lengthy. But again, the reason for that really is, again, it's somewhat dictated by national policy and guidance, the need to do that. And really, any decisions we make, whatever they may be, they need to be backed up by their evidence. So when we come to the examination phase, an inspector will be assessing this and seeing what the input into these documents has been in terms of any other feedback we've received, not only from members of the public, but statutory parties that may have an interest in particular areas that they're covering. It all sits behind the decisions that we'll be making. And listed here is not by any means an exhaustive list. This is very much the most recent documents that have been prepared. They've been presented to planning policy committees over the last sort of year period. And they are also included on our website, which again I'll show you shortly. But that just gives you an indication around the sort of more recent work that's been undertaken. And it's very much the case, I suppose, the key ones, particularly the infrastructure delivery plan, the transport assessment, site assessment methodology paper, and viability are the sort of the ones that are sort of ongoing. These are stage one reports that have been prepared to accompany this current consultation. And then clearly there'll be more work to be done to build those up towards the Regulation 19 stage. So they're all available on to view online. And if people do wish to make comments on those alongside any further comments on the plan itself or to supplement their comments, we would welcome that. So we're happy to receive those comments. So what happens next? So as mentioned, in terms of the overall process that every local authority has to follow, there is clearly this consultation to run. We've got the closing date on the 24th of March. So we would welcome comments to be received in that time frame. Any comments received will then have to be obviously reviewed, and we'll be preparing a feedback report as we've done with previous consultations. To outline the key issues that have been raised, and obviously how that then takes us forward into developing the next stage of the local plan. As mentioned, obviously more evidence will be gathered and tested before we have any final revisions of the next stage of the local plan. As mentioned, there will be a consultation on that Regulation 19 stage. So again, there's a requirement in legislation for a 6-week period for that to take place. As mentioned, we're looking towards September for taking that to be approved by members. That's subject to obviously decisions going forwards. And then we're looking to submit by the end of this year in line with the government's deadline. So assuming that goes to plan, then the government once they've received our documentation, they would then be appointing an independent planning inspector to undertake the examination in public. So again, they can, through that process, they'll be scrutinising all of the information that comes in, including comments that have been raised, particularly at this stage and also at the Regulation 19 stage, to really understand what are the key issues and what needs to be explored further, both in sort of written statements, but also in inviting people to speak based on the agenda that the inspector will set. Following that, there may well be an indication around whether there's any modifications needed, and they will, as mentioned earlier, that's the main modification stage. And again, there'll be a consultation on any proposed changes to the plan. If following all that, the plan is found sound, and that's very much terminology that's set out again in national policy, the test of soundness. Then the inspector will give their recommendation in a written report to the council to say whether they feel the plan is sound and therefore can be adopted. And then the final decision to adopt, if that was the case, would still rest with elected members to make that final decision. Okay, so we'll just quickly stop sharing there, and I'll share the online answer the response. So we just move on to the next stage of looking at how we how you can currently look at the information we've got on the website. So if you just bear with me. Just bear with me, that's not come up. Right. Okay, so in terms of the main, if you go to the main web page on the council's website, so if I just take you back to if you go to the actual homepage of the council website, you'll see there is a direct link to the consultation information. So you can click on that, and that takes you to the main homepage for the Rochford Local Plan consultation. So as set out here, we've got a number, obviously, of links here, which I'll take you through. There is, in essence, we have got a consultation portal, which is the online system by which you can read the document and make comments directly. There is also a PDF version of the local plans. That's the document as it would be presented in printed form, but obviously it's digital. So you can see it in its sort of printed iteration in that way. There is also a link to the interactive map. Again, I'll take you through that. And there is, I'd certainly highlight, there is a lot of information there, but really sort of written in a more sort of accessible formats, and certainly gives you a sort of a quick snapshot of what we're looking at. There are a number of links here at the bottom also, which give you more plain English guides around what about the local plan, timelines, and as mentioned, like the evidence base. I think also very useful is the frequently asked questions. So that may well, if you do have particular questions in your mind, certainly refer you to that in the first instance, because there may well be answers to those questions already there. But if there aren't, we're more than happy to receive those questions if you have them, and we can try to address that or add them to the FAQs. And just more generally, news and updates is also included there. So in terms of the portal, so as mentioned, this is the council's online system. And that is where people can register and then comment directly on there without having to sort of writing by the means. What all it requires you is to register, and you'll put your email address in, and I think it will ask you to put in a verification code to your email address. And then once that's set up, you can select particular topics that you're interested in, and then that allows you to be notified in future based on those topic selections. But once you are logged in, again, as mentioned, we've got the document here set out in its 4 distinct sections that I took you through earlier. And obviously through that there is it's the same paragraph numbers, etc., as per the PDF or printed version. And throughout that, we've got the consultation points where you can actually make those comments. So as an example, if we were to go to section B, and then we've got the first policy here, which is policy MG1, spatial strategy. You may read through that. There's a draft policy. And then at the end of that section, you'll see here, for example, there is the question, and you can click on the comment box. And because I've obviously entered something before, you can have resume, but it would normally just go straight to this, which is whether, do you have in terms of this question, do you agree with strategic policy MG1? You can select yes or no. If you click yes, as an example, then you click next. And then what comes up then is the comment box. So as it states here, if you type more than 100 words, it just asks you to provide a summary. That there is no more than 100 words. So I mean, if I fill in as an example, if I put in my response, you'll see here it gives you a word count at the bottom, and then it automatically, because it's gone over that 100-word limit, it then asks you for a summary of in 100 words or fewer. So you can put that in. And by all means, obviously, that the full response is still taken into consideration, but I think it's just it helps in terms of being understanding what the key principal issues are in terms of that summary. But certainly to reassure that all information is taken into account and obviously submitting the other side. So see here in this example that I put in, it shows that I'm within that word limit. There's 2 words remaining, and then it allows me to go to the next stage. And then what you get following that is just a summary of what you've put it, or the overview of what you've submitted or going to submit, and then you can obviously submit that. So that's another example. So if I'll take you to another section just to show you again. So let's say if we're going to go to section C, I wanted to respond to policy TC1, which is around future retail and leisure needs. Again, read through that section there. And then there'll be another question at the bottom again, which is, do you agree with policy TC1? And again, you can respond accordingly. So if we can complete that information. And again, it will ask for a summary of that because I've gone over the 100-word limit. So I'll put my summary in. And again, that's within that word limit, so I can again see what that response is. So as if you're, and also we're not expecting everyone to answer every single question. So we do appreciate there are obviously a number of policies within the document. It's really in terms of your preferences, what areas are really of importance to you, how you want to respond, and we're certainly more than happy to, if you just want to respond to one particular policy or a particular site. That's absolutely fine, and we can obviously respond accordingly. And don't worry if you do feel like, oh, I've put the wrong information in the wrong question, because we can sort the other end. But clearly, it's helpful if you can put the comments against the right areas that you want it to be. But certainly, on the other side of this, we clearly need to make sure, as we mentioned, we'll be preparing a feedback report, and really that's that scrutiny of looking at all the responses that have been made and trying to bring that all together. Okay, so in terms of that's kind of covers the how to use the portal. It's relatively simple in that respect. Again, what you can, as another thing to mention also, is that you don't have to respond in one sitting. You can sort of put your draft in as it came up on my one there. You can resume. So if you want to respond to a few and come back to it later, you can do that as well. So we will save drafts and keep them in there under your account. So, and clearly, again, as mentioned, with the consultation closing on the 24th of March, it's important that those are obviously submitted before that time. Obviously, the deadline being 5 p.m. on the 24th of March. So that's be helpful. So the other section I think I just wanted to take you through was the interactive map. So as mentioned earlier, so there is a link on the main homepage for the local plan consultation, and we do have an interactive map that gives you a visual representation of obviously where the sites that have been identified for testing are, but also, as I'll come on to, it does show you the sites which have been marked as emission sites at this point. So as I say, there's been a whole host of sites that have been submitted over time, and this map gives you the indication of that. Now, when you do load up the map, it does present you with all of the information that we've included on there. So not just site information, but there is also constraint data. And that's really there to provide you a bit of the wider context. Again, depending on what your area of interest may be, that is available on there. So again, if I'll zoom in slightly so you can see the bar on the right-hand side here. So I'll just do that quickly. So you'll see on what's called the layers tab, we have here, that is, if you scroll through that, as you see at the top of it, we've got what's called submissions. And so what that lists here is based on the site assessment methodology paper that I mentioned earlier, which is one of the evidence documents. The sites have been assessed and then categorized based on that methodology ultimately. So in simple terms, what we've got is clear potential options, marginal potential options, and then site options, sorry, and then marginal omission site options and clear omission site option. And again, you can, with this little icon here, you can toggle that on and off. So if you just wanted to view what are the potential sites, you can have just those clear potential and marginal potential site options. Now that will just display that. Likewise, if you wanted to just show the emission sites, you can switch them on as well. And again, the colors are corresponding to the legend here on the side. In terms of the constraint data, we have a number of those, as I mentioned. So we've got the greenbelt layer. So if I was to turn that on, that gives you an indication of where the greenbelt boundaries run up to, whether sites are within or out of the greenbelt. Equally, in terms of flood zones, we've got flood zones 2 and 3, so sort of the higher risk flood zone areas. That gives you an indication about where those lie. And I won't necessarily go through all of them, but there's obviously a number of different layers that will come up, so we can toggle those on and off as you please in terms of understanding sort of more intricate details. And if there are any particular layers that sort of you want to find out more information, or this sort of, you can come back to us in terms of any queries around those. But going back to the sites, so if as an example, so if you wanted to look at some information around a particular site, I'll just zoom out again on this to see the map. So if I wanted to look at a site in Hullbridge, I live near here. Perhaps if I wanted to sort of understand a bit more about that one, what you can do is then click on that part of the map. And as you'll see here, what comes up, it'll tell you, it comes up firstly saying obviously what are the constraint data, but we've also got the site information. So if you click on this little drop down box, it then zooms you into that map area or the site boundary, and that becomes a hatched line. So that gives you an indication of what that site actually is. In this case, this has got a reference of CFS 149B. So what it stands for is Call for Sites 149B, and that's the terminology again used when we've had earlier parts of the process where there's what's called a call for sites that again we have to undertake to invite submissions to be considered. This is showing in terms of site assessment, it tells you that it's a clear potential site option. It tells you the site address and an indicative number of dwellings. I emphasize it's indicative. For a lot of these sites, it's based on an assumed density. So I would say there's still more refinement of that going forwards if any site was eventually to be identified as a preferred or allocated site. And in terms of site area, it gives you the hectares, so the size of the site in hectares. What also is here is a link to that, as I mentioned, the site assessment methodology paper. So again, that is obviously on the evidence-based page, but there is a direct link there. So if we wanted to find out more information beyond what's stated here, that would be contained within that SAM paper. So we just need to find that reference. So as an example, if we wanted to look at CFS 149B, there is a annex at the bottom of that document. I think the quickest way of finding that would be doing a search, which you can search on a document by doing Control F on your keyboard. They are listed in number order as well, if that's preferable. But that just gives you the more information there. So as indicated at the top of that table, just gives you some of the further information, and there's also the commentary that's attached to that particular site. So that gives you that view. In terms of another example, if we just quickly go to, let's say, to the edge of Rochford, and I wanted to look at a site there. So you can click and drag across. So if I wanted to look at this site here, again, click on the site. it brings up the relevant background layers that are kind of relevant, but the one we're looking for here is this highlighted one, which is the clear potential site option of CFS 050. And again, we can expand that. And then that tells us again what the site address is, which in this case is land south of former adult community learning centre. Indicative number of dwellings or houses, 50, and that's a 2 hectare site. And again, if we went to the site assessment methodology paper and looked up this site, again, it gives us a bit more information around what's been considered at this early stage in respect of that. Now, if following that you wanted to make a comment, so again, we go back to the consultation portal. So as mentioned, we've got the 4 main sections. Section D is where the sites are listed. So there is in the plan itself, there is also a list of those sites that have been identified. And as you'll see here, under each of these, there is a comment box next to the relevant reference number. So if you've got your reference, let's say CFS 149B, and I want to comment on that site, again, we can provide a comment on that one. So these are grouped together in terms of small sites, and then we've got urban extensions. So in this case, that one would be under the category of urban extension. And so if we see here CFS 149B, and again, we can comment on that one. So what that's effectively asking, as you see, is do you have a comment on to make on the site, as it states at the top there. So we do the same as we did earlier. We say, yes, I do. And then we'd go next. Then again, the same principles apply. You can write as much as you like, but if there's beyond 100 words, then they'll require a summary of those key points to be made. Okay, so that takes us through the how to use the interactive maps. I'll just quickly stop sharing there, and I'll just we'll come on now to the questions that have been raised in advance. Okay. So, apologies, just going through that. So, questions. So we've, as I say, we've received some questions in advance of today's session. So there's 4 that were submitted. So I'll just go through those now, and then we'll come on to the sort of the broad answers to those. So the first question that's been set out there is, how can the council remove excuse me, the greenbelt status of land east of Garrans when greenbelt can only be removed under exceptional circumstances? And the claim for social housing requirement fails, as there's been many opportunities to utilise other land which is not greenbelt. Unless every single property is built unless every single property built is social housing, then we're sacrificing our greenbelt land to line the pockets of, in this case, it's 18 bellways, but I guess it could equally apply to any developer. So in terms of the response to that, the government obviously has set a number of homes that it expects Rochford to build every year, as mentioned. So we've got the targets that we have to use as a starting point, at least in consideration of what's their expectation for the area. If we don't think that we can meet that target by building within existing towns, villages, and built-up areas, then we do unfortunately have to look elsewhere. And so we obviously, through the work we've been doing, we have been looking at what are the available brownfield sites. So when we don't think there is enough of this land to meet the housing requirement from government, and just purely looking at brownfield areas. But however, we'd welcome comments in respect of that. So not being able to deliver the housing both affordable and those for general sale, or what's called market housing, the government says we need to when you consider exceptional circumstance, and that requires us to consider releasing greenbelt land for new development. Government has also introduced a new concept, so I mentioned this briefly earlier, around the grey belt, which is greenbelt land that does not meet certain rules. And if you have to release greenbelt land, then it is grey belt which should be released in the first instance. We do have specialist consultants currently looking at this, so we're having to prepare what's called a greenbelt assessment. We expect to publish that report later in the summer, and that'll feed into the Regulation 19 document. So really, just to finish on that one, if a local planner has to propose to release greenbelt land, we obviously want to make sure it's the minimum amount possible, but clearly there's a significant pressure that the government's placed upon us when it comes to that beginning, the starting point, which is the housing target. Okay, so moving on to the second question that's been raised. I'll just read this out. Can I please ask if the local water supplier is supportive of any expansion of housing in the area, as it seems there is a reticence from them on various applications? Also, can I ask if, along with any plans applications, if there are supporting plans for improved new roads, medical, dental centres, and if there are any plans for any properties to be built to be energy efficient? Some good points raised there. So, I mean, in response, the council is discussing the local plan with all organisations who are responsible for providing things like water and sewage, roads and health facilities. The work we've done so far on this is mainly set out within the infrastructure delivery plan. So that's clearly the principal document we refer to in that respect. And also the transport assessment, which is another document which looks at the capacity of the road network and the impacts and how growth could impact upon its function. But both of those stage one versions of those documents are available to view on our website. So as we set out in terms of the evidence-based page, they are available there for people to view, and we're happy to receive comments on those as well if people wish to do that. All of the sort of statutory bodies also be responding formally to this public consultation. So we have, as an example, we have consulted Essex County Council, as they are one of the main providers. So they are the Highway Authority, the Flood Authority, Education Authority, etc. So clearly we do want to get their views, as well as water companies. So we have consulted those as well, well as engaging on them through the infrastructure delivery plan work. So again, once they've responded, we clearly want to sort of look through their comments and see what they've said and take them on board. And we'll be doing more detailed work to see if local plans as a whole and individual sites can deliver the infrastructure that we need. If they can't, or improvements can't be made, this is a very strong evidence as to why a site shouldn't be developed. So as mentioned, we've got to consider what the evidence is to support any decisions going forwards. So that's very important. But thank you for raising that question. That's a very good question. So to the third question listed there, so if the draft local plan is available and being consulted, can information in this be used to weight objections to any forthcoming planning applications ahead of the plan being approved? I think it's important to distinguish, obviously, with the local plan being at an early stage. Again, this is how government sets this out, that there is very limited weight that you would be able to use this version of the plan in making decisions. And clearly it only really becomes or given full weight at the point of it being adopted, because at that point, any what's called unresolved objections have been resolved by the inspector, if the inspector is concluding the plan is sound and can be adopted. So that's something to be clear on. So I think we just have to, obviously, as I say, this current moment in time, it's very limited, if any, weight at all that could be applied to this current version of the plan, and even at the next stage there would be limited weight. It's really as we advance further through that process that would start to increase, but it would still have to be the existing extant plan remains in play. until it is formally replaced, i.e. that this a new plan is adopted, so that there is a sort of a transition in that respect. But yeah, there is limited weight there. And finally, in terms of the fourth question that was raised, so can you confirm that you're including the research that was presented to you previously in a document about the issues of building on land between Great Wheatley Road and Spring Gardens? It includes environmental findings, infrastructure issues, traffic surveys, and school surveys, to name a few. Also included was information about land adjacent to the A127 near Rayleigh. So yeah, in terms of any information that's been provided previously, that has been considered. We have prepared. There was a feedback report that was accompanying the 2021 consultation that was previously undertaken. So that did set out what are the key matters. And clearly, in terms of working forwards, we need to have those comments in mind. But we would strongly urge residents to read what is contained within this draft plan, because things clearly have moved on since that version was last consulted. And if we encourage you to put forward your views on the specifics within this plan. So including information which you may have submitted before. So we're more than happy to, if you feel that that's still relevant, would suggest that is included in future correspondence. So this will ensure this will ensure that it will be part of the comments that we report to members after the consultation closes, which will be part of the consideration of next steps for the final local plan. Also, please remember, if you're commenting on sites which have an active planning application, we need to provide comments on both the planning application and the local plan. So I do appreciate that it can be confusing in respect of if there are sites which have come in advance of the local plan being adopted. And clearly, there is a number of those. That it's important that you respond to that planning application, because that's obviously more detailed than what we're looking at, and it's very much a proposition they're trying to advance quickly. So it's important you respond to that, but also likewise, if you feel strongly that you want to also raise it in respect to the local plan, that's important too. So I think it's ensuring that you respond to both in that respect. Okay, we'll come on to a few more minutes just to pick up some other questions here. Just reading this question here. So yeah, so hopefully I've interpreted this the right way, but I think question being raised here around the limitations. I think it's in terms of limitations placed on both the councillors and residents. But yeah, I suppose in terms of there is clearly, as I talked about earlier, the national requirements and for what we need to do very much do dictate what the processes are that we need to undertake for this preparation of any local plan is requiring to do that. So that does, I think that's certainly important. If there are particular points, if we feel that we should draw out more, then we're more than happy to receive any sort of feedback in that respect. And if there's updates, as I say, to the FAQs, frequently asked questions, that might help in understanding that's something we can look at. But yeah, I think in terms of the various meetings that we, as I say, there's obviously a number of different committee meetings that we need to take these documents through. We do appreciate that there's certainly a technical element to that, but I think we hopefully can try and make it as clear as possible around the scope of some of those decisions and what is appropriate. Clearly, from an officer perspective, the advice that we're providing is to ensure that the council is considering what's required by government, and that we're taking the right approach to try and address that. Another question has come here. So if I to build on Greenbelt, it's the only space viable. Well, I think certainly the key thing around Greenbelt, as I mentioned, the starting point is to understand what is our baseline position. So we do need to understand, obviously, as we set out in terms of our numbers, at least, what is currently permitted and what's been completed. So that kind of takes off what we need to plan for ultimately as new sites. And then with those new sites, we need to understand what the amount of brownfield land that's available. Now, clearly, there is not a lot of that has already come forward over time, whether that's through the current local plan or for others windfall applications. But certainly, the inspector would be expecting us to sort of set out, and we will be setting that out in terms of what we've looked at to ensure that we're not just going straight to the greenbelt, because that's really the last resort. But the difficulty being is that the level of need of the requirements that government set are very high. But yeah, certainly from what the work we've done so far is, as we say, it's purely testing what meeting that need could look like, and really the final answer around really what, because obviously clearly it's not just about greenbelt impact, it's also about the other infrastructure capacity, for example, that we'll need to understand what that looks like as well. So if the answer is that certain sites shouldn't go ahead, it needs to be informed by various pieces of evidence, whether that be transport assessment, infrastructure delivery plan, greenbelt review will come into it. But that's certainly something we need to understand. And in terms of responding to the government, certainly members have asked us as officers to support with regards to the letters that they have written to government, outlining those concerns. Certainly with regards to the level of growth that's being expected, that's driven by that total figure that's often stated, which is 1.5 million homes over the next parliamentary period, and that's effectively then divided up into the different authorities based on that standard methodology. So certainly there's been a lot of correspondence that councillors have gone back to government on to contest that, and will continue to do so. But I think the key thing from our point of view is that with any position we do end up taking, we do need to ensure that we're going back with the appropriate evidence to support that. So that's the key thing. Okay, well, thank you everyone for providing those questions. So I'll just quickly bring up the final slide. There we go. Okay. Okay, well, as I say, thank you everyone. I think the thing I just want to finish off on was in terms of where more information can be found. So just quickly, we have, as mentioned, we've got online and in-person information. So if that's set out there, do go to our website. And I think just one thing to emphasise is, yes, we've got the consultation portal, and that's certainly our preference, but we're more than happy to receive comments via email or via the letter. As set out here, also we do have response forms, paper response forms available at those locations. And you can either post those to us, or if you just want to take a picture of something you've written and send it in to us, it'll all be considered and processed appropriately. So please do respond. As I say, 24th of March is the closing date. And if you do have any questions in the meantime, just to clarify things in terms of what, if you're having difficulties responding, do get in touch with us, and we'll assist where we can to ensure you can get your comments through to us. But otherwise, yeah, just to say thank you for everyone's time, and have a good evening. Thank you very much.